we are now.
Okay. No. Yeah. And then, yeah, entonces. Okay.
Well, I would like to strongly object to the representation that Pantoja does of this view of the crisis, because I don't see the human, and I don't see, let's say, identification between human beings in your scheme and your explanation. So yesterday I referred to concerts in the middle of protests, and the value of humanity and intersubjectivity is something that is extremely important to think when you think of resistance. Not because we want to produce something that is our own, but we want to be able to produce ourselves and to share our selfhood with others in a kind fashion. This may sound like a religious response to the religion of neoliberalism, but it's not. It's rather secular. So I would like to insist in thinking of the human. When I think of Duane's presentation, I think of the exchanges that take place between the island and the diaspora and the entanglement of people and culture of different sedimentations. And I think, what is the human culture that is being produced in those settings? What are the books that are being read, translated? What are the films? What are the documentaries that circulate? How do they circulate? And how do we recreate ourselves with each other in the middle of a crisis? How do we set the parameters for our own culture to be produced in the best way? And in that regard, I think Liliana Coto's presentation was extremely powerful because it cites those places, not only as a space, but also at the type of human-to-human exchange. So again, I just want to offer that as a reflection and as a response as well from the audience. But I do appreciate your presentations. Thank you.
And the last question before turning it over to the panel.
I have different questions for each one of you. And Doctora Liliana, I'm interested in hearing, there's been a lot of talk on the economics and sort of maybe following your thread there a little bit. And so my question for you is around economic development and public spaces, el rescate de tierras. And what do you see the role of public space development in economic development, where architecture, history, the arts, what role is that playing or could play in those niches or yes, and in Puerto Rico? The reason I'm talking about that is because one of the things that I heard a little bit of, but we didn't talk about, I believe, in my opinion, right, is that and this question goes with you, Jose, Dr. Jose, it is, what do you believe is in the invisible hand that has that indirect or unintended benefit to the United States to keep their hand in Puerto Rico? And perhaps, Dr. Pantoja, you could answer a little bit of that also. Because I'm like always thinking, why do they have their hand? Why don't they let us go, period? The other thing that I was, and Senor Pantojas, the question for me around that also is, Emilio, okay. Emilio, una de las cosas que a mí me impacta siempre en Puerto Rico es que yo siendo de Guayama, a nosotros nunca nos llegaban los chavos ni para arte en las escuelas. Se quedaban en San Juan. And the presentations there showed a lot of information on where the development of exportation and importation and all of that is happening in the island. So I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about that. The other thing is, I keep thinking of fishermen and the reasons why in Puerto Rico we're not talking more about that sector and how the laws have impacted that.
Okay, can we hold it there?
Yeah.
Because we've got a lot of questions now, and there's going to be, we're running out of the other end of time. So I'm going to ask that the responses in the aggregate not exceed 10 minutes, because otherwise they will be running into the keynote address. So.
Because they talk about
Your question was about how do spatial occupation. Okay, the question was about spatial occupation and economic development.
Yes.
So, well, one of the things that after Emilio's presentation, I was devastated in the sense that I was talking about such micro experiences and about people that are aware of those things, but unless we have a sort of university of social movements where these type of intellectuals would be there to exchange knowledge with those other, be it students, agricultural people, etc., in order to be able to do all this macro politics. Because according to what Roberto said, who does those policies at this point? You have pointed out from Muñoz Marin on, they are all being people that are gaining from the colony, but they are also colonized people. And one of the issues that these groups that are in Puerto Rico now, that they are aware of the macro thing, but also they are dealing with the fact that they have to do activities in order to deal with that area of our lives, which is the internal, as in Vamos they say, we have to deal with the internal colonized person that we have inside us. And all these big proposals, they have to be done, Emilio, within the context of the workshops in the strike, because the students are looking for knowledge in order to be able to discuss those issues with La Junta. But if we discuss them among ourselves, they are never going to learn that much. And in that sense, it's not a question of looking at it from a unrealistic position. I think that there is the vision. There is number one, the need to talk person to person, and that you see in Vamos. Even though Vamos is a group that is of people that I would say that are in their 40s. You see it in Jornada, in their 30s and the 40s, and you see it in Campamento, which are 25, 26. These are people that are not in the high levels of government. They are not, as people in the Jornada, they say, we know that we cannot go up in the social ladder. We don't have that option. We don't have that option. The only option that we have is, like one of them said, to put our bodies in the struggle. And they put their bodies in the struggle. That's why they have decided to concentrate in direct action. But that doesn't mean that they are not talking about the possibilities of becoming a wider organization with a strategy also. Because another thing that I want to say is that, is that this, not only the students, but the organizations here, they are talking about long-term strategy. For instance, Vamos is talking about a 15-year strategy. a 15-year strategy which is oriented towards a change, a paradigm change. And I am going to add that I am not saying that they are free of contradictions, because with the same tone that they talk about the long-time strategy and the paradigm change, they don't give enough attention to popular education, to a systematic approach to that process of popular education, which the younger people are doing. And it's not a question of idealizing the younger people, it's just because I go there and I offer myself, I offer my services, and free. And they don't use it because they have this vertical view of what politics are. And I am talking just about these groups. I am not talking about other groups because I talk only about the groups that I go to. So in that sense, I think that there is a possibility, but I wasn't able to talk about the University of Social Movements, where we could get together and we can get all this knowledge and we can exchange knowledge between them and us and them. And then in that sense, I think that we're going to decolonize the internal colonized person that we have within.
So I thank for all of you for your questions. Yes, I'm not an expert in energy. That's a particular branch within economics, energy economics. But I do have heard many proposals for solar energy in Puerto Rico. And I agree with them because if we look at what is happening in Peñuelas, you know, this way of producing energy right now in Puerto Rico is expensive and it's also polluting. So when you include the health cost to that energy cost, it's a very high cost. So in that sense, when we talk about energy in Puerto Rico, we should also include the health cost, especially because we are a very small country. It's not the same if you are, you know, Brazil and you put a plant very far from all the communities and nobody's being polluted. And I believe that right now there is an opportunity for solar energy to be developed because we have a huge blackout, this year or last year? Last year, and we're going to have more than that because the infrastructure of PREPA is very weak. So, but I think that, you know, we need to continue educating people because, for instance, even in my house, to bring this at the micro level, you know, we're thinking, what are we going to do if there's another blackout? So most of the neighbors of me they are just looking for power plants. And I said, no, the power plant is so expensive as you know, as looking for solar energy, and also you can use it throughout the whole month, not just in the blackout. So I think that if we continue to educate people about this and we take advantage of a very sad situation, which is these blackouts and the weak infrastructure, we're going to have more opportunity there. And I want to comment about these things of corruption because I know that, for instance, in the media, they love to talk about corruption because corruption is something that's sells. If you go with a serious analysis, they say, oh, that's too boring. I'd like you to talk about how many thieves we have in the government. We all have thieves in our government. And the U.S. have a lot of, actually when I was looking right now at the corruption index in the world, and the U.S. is not in the middle, it's not in the top list, and have a growing economy, and you see, so corruption is everywhere, and I don't believe it's a determinant for the debt problem that we have. It's a determinant for other things, for lack of democracy, for the perhaps the income inequality that we have, because we have oligarchy in Puerto Rico that is benefit from all this corrupted class. But what I have to be cautious with this is, as I said to one of my friends, that he's actually a Marxist, and we were talking with Agustin about this the other day. Some people say, well, the problem is corruption, both at the left and the right wing. So what is coming next? Well, the control board, because if you said that the local manager, there's nobody in Puerto Rico that know how to manage, and they are all corrupted. So what is coming next is the control board. So I believe that the control board is actually going to increase corruption, and you can see that as Roberto was saying in the case of PREPA with Donahue. Donahue was imposed from the market because they say, well, we need somebody from this list of manager. You have to pick one. They said that to PREPA, and that's how the Donahue came to Puerto Rico. So I believe with this control board, we will not have resolved the corruption thing. I believe that the solution for ending corruption, not just in Puerto Rico, but in the U.S. and in many other places, is civic engagement. When I was working in the United Nations, we correlate a lot measures of civic engagement against corruption, and that's what we see. The countries that have a lot of civic engagement everywhere in the government, they have lower levels of corruption. And that's something that we have to be always claiming, to integrate communities and people within the board of directors of every agency in Puerto Rico, and to increase, in that sense, their engagement with decision making. About why the U.S. don't give independence, it's interesting with this thing of the control board. You know, people that believe in a statehood in Puerto Rico said that the path to statehood is the control board, and people that believe in independence also said the same thing, that that's the path to control board, to independence. I believe that the decision of Sessions yesterday is just stating that they would like to keep the colony forever if we allow it. So I believe that they do have economic interest in Puerto Rico, especially using as a tax holiday for many people in the finance sector. And I don't believe that, and this is something that nobody of you asked, but I just want to say because it reminds me of what I've heard from both sides in Puerto Rico. I don't believe that the control board is going to resolve, or is going to bring us next to the solution of this tax.
I'll be quick. I stand because I like to look at your faces. Two things. I'm either a crusty old man or a pro-cannabis evangelical. That's good. Pick your choice. If you want to read what my understanding of colonialism and sensitivities are, there are two articles that I just published in 80 Grados. One is called La Patria Light, and the other one is called Colonizados. The one on Colonizados I put on Crónicas del Colapso. The question is, we're talking about policy, and we're talking about transforming the economy and the policy. And I am not an individualist, I am not a nominalist. I believe that social transformation takes place by classes, class conflict, social struggles. And this does not begin in an individual. I just came from a service where they reminded me that the Roman Empire killed a guy who looked for justice and equality and freedom. So, you know, I'm very sensitive. But I think that the problem is another one. The problem here is, I agree that corruption is not the problem. The problem is bad governance. And corruption is one of the issues within governance. And the problem that we have is bad governance. If corruption was not a problem, why does the board, does the Junta, not want to audit the debt? Because there are two thieves inside it. And so it is a problem. But, you know, it's part of governance. Of course, it's not a single problem. I don't like single issues. I'm not a single issue person. Fishing and the arts. I was told, I do Caribbean economic development, and I do Caribbean economic development, and I posed the question to an environmentalist friend of mine. He's a biologist, a marine biologist, at the National University of Colombia, San Andres. And he told me, believe it or not, Emilio, within the Caribbean is a desert, an oceanic desert. There are oases in the desert. There are places in the Caribbean where you can find an abundance of fish. But the Caribbean as such does not have an abundance of fish. There are areas, there are reefs, there are specific areas. He said to me, the seas that gives you the most fish in terms of commercial global fishing are the North Sea and the South Sea, Chile and Alaska. That's where the abundance is. That's what he told me. I'm just relying. And on the question of independence, why don't one day let us go? No one gives you something that you haven't asked for or demanded. I mean, empires don't just give up land. Empires respond to social struggles. And the majority of Puerto Ricans do not even vote for independence. So, but in fact, last May and June, 2 articles came out, one in the Boston Globe and one in the USA Today, from conservative think tanks, from professors in conservative think tanks, telling that independence was a possible alternative, a possible solution to the insolvency of Puerto Rico. So there are people in the conservative think tanks, the Mercatus think tank and University of Brown University, thinking about it.
Please check with bibliography. The 3 next ones are instruments for popular education that I would like to share with you. The next one, the next one. The next one, if you want to check on the organization that I've spoken of, you have, all of them have websites. And at the end, de la nada, tripleta in your two, it's another way of doing ideological struggle. So these are things that you can use for popular education.
Okay, we've run out of time. I'd like us to thank again our panel and thank all of you for coming and those who asked questions as well.
Goal here of engaging critically the Puerto Rican colonial crisis of Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans, of the people of Puerto Rico, which is not only the archipelago, but is the Puerto Ricans in the U.S. also. And from above, from the standpoint of the crisis of global neoliberal capitalism, of empire, and of what's going on in the island now, which is the collapse of the colonial state and a societal crisis. And also from below, from the standpoint of collective action, of resistance, of what people are doing, of what are the possible path of future. And I think that we have had a really rich and engaging conversation about such questions. And to end, we invited very special voice to be able to put it not only in the larger landscape of global crisis, which we have done, but also within the specific moment that we're living in the U.S. And there are 3 very clear references. This Thursday, the U.S. dropped the biggest bomb after the nuclear bombs that they had done in their history in Afghanistan. There is, as we have been talking about, a student strike in Puerto Rico, and there is a wave of resistance and struggle there. And as U.S. Latinos, because Puerto Ricans, we're also U.S. Latinos, we're facing a very difficult, harsh moment. And one of the best voices to speak about such issues is Juan Gonzalez. So I'm going to, Juan has a very long history, even though he's young. So I'm going to read some notes about Juan. Juan Gonzalez was born in Ponce, Puerto Rico, and we people from Ponce are very localists. And raised in East Harlem and Brooklyn. As an undergraduate student at Columbia University, he was active in the anti-Vietnam War movement and played a leading role in the protests that shut down the college in the spring of 1968 as one of 3 strike central representatives on the strike coordinating committee. He was a member of Student for Democratic Society and a founding member of the New York City branch of the Young Lords organization that rightfully so is getting the recognition that it deserves. Serving on its first Central Committee as its Minister of Education. In 1981, he was elected as the first president of the National Congress for Puerto Rican Rights, and this is where the context in which I actually met him. He had a brilliant career as an investigative print journalist since the late 1970s until last year when he retired after 30 years of service at the New York Daily News. In 1998, Gonzalez won his first George Polk Award for unflinching investigative reporting. He's also former president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. In addition, he has been named by Hispanic Business Magazine as one of America's most influential Hispanics, as well as earning a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Hispanic Academy of Media, Arts, and Sciences. Juan has written 3 books: Fallout, The Environmental Consequences of the World Trade Center Collapse; Harvest of Empire, A History of Latinos in America, for where he also made a film, and Roll Down Your Window, Stories of a Forgotten America. Juan is also co-author with Joseph Torres of News for All the People, The Epic Story of Race and the American Media, a history of the American media with special focus on media outlets owned and controlled by people of color and how they were suppressed, sometimes violently, by mainstream political, corporate, and media leaders. He's presently professor of journalism at Rutgers University and co-host of Democracy Now!, a syndicated radio and television show that is regarded as one of the best in the U.S., broadcasting national and international news and analysis from a critical perspective. Please welcome Brother Juan Gonzalez.
Thank you to my old friend and compañero de lucha, Agustin, and to the other organizers of this event for inviting me to be among such a distinguished group of scholars from both Puerto Rico and the United States in hopes of trying to engage in a deeper dialogue spread a broader understanding and perhaps a more accurate understanding of the terrible economic, financial, and political crisis that has befallen the island and the people of Puerto Rico. I haven't been able to be at the conference today because, as I told a couple of people, my youngest daughter is a senior in high school and she's going through the whole college thing. She got admitted to UMass and to the honors college here, and I told her, I said, Gabriela, I'm coming up to here, Steve, why don't you come with me and do the tour? Because today is UMass Day here. So I finally convinced her, and she's trying to decide between her choices. And so we spent most of the day touring the campus and getting a better understanding of what's going on here at UMass. I've been asked to share some thoughts on how the crisis relates to the broader questions of the global crisis that so many nations and people are facing, the Trump presidency and U.S. policies toward Latin America. Needless to say, that's a complex topic, one that requires hard work to fully understand, and I approach it as neither an expert in economics nor political science. I have, of course, been studying closely for nearly 50 years now the relationship between Puerto Rico and the United States as a journalist, as a researcher and chronicler of Latino history, as a longtime activist in the Puerto Rican communities of the United States, and as someone who was born on that incredibly beautiful island, still has family there, and cares deeply about what happens to my homeland. Excuse me if some of what I say here might be a little repetitious of what's been said earlier, but when the crisis broke to the world back in June of 2015, shortly afterwards I was asked at NYU to give a presentation on
my initial take on it. So I'm borrowing some from that presentation, but of course, lots of things have changed since October of 2015. So I've had to try to update it, as well as to deal with the broader issue that that I've been asked to talk about. So I followed the crisis in Puerto Rico on an almost daily basis until roughly June of 2016, when the Promesa, when the debate in Congress happened and the Promesa board was established. And since then, I've sort of been forced off in another direction because I did, as Agustin said, retire from the Daily News and then began finishing a new book that I think has a lot of relationship to what you're discussing here. It's a book looking at the enormous mass movements that have developed across the United States, at the urban popular movements that are attempting to beat back the neoliberal policies that have ruled urban America for the past 40, 50 years now. So I've been sort of deeply immersed in what's going on in Seattle with Ed Murray, in Minneapolis with Betsy Hodges, in New York with Bill de Blasio, in Boston with Martin Walsh, in Newark with Ras Baraka, and in Jackson, Chaco Lumumba before he passed away, in Philadelphia, and a bunch of other cities, trying to understand the fight back against neoliberalism that is really extremely vibrant. It's not understood as a movement that is actually a worldwide movement. If you look at what's going on in Barcelona or Paris or London, there's all of these popular movements that have suddenly become the new hope of political change, are these urban struggles. And so that's what I've been spending most of my time, because the book has to be out by September, so I'm doing the final copy editing on it right now. So how did this whole situation with Puerto Rico develop? The average American only became aware of the crisis in June of 2015, when the Wall Street financial experts have known for years that the day of reckoning was coming. Still, corporate America was stunned when Garcia Padilla announced in the New York Times interview on June 29th and in a televised address to people of Puerto Rico that same evening that the annual debt service was no longer payable. He thus publicly acknowledged his government was on the verge of the biggest debt default and bankruptcy in the history of American municipal bonds. Far bigger than what happened in Orange County decades ago or in Detroit more recently. In the year after Garcia Padilla's announcement, Puerto Rico received more attention in the U.S. media and among Washington politicians than at any time in the island's modern history. The almost daily coverage surpassed even the last media juggernaut some 15 years previously, when massive civil disobedience protests forced the end of the U.S. Navy's bombing practice on the island of Yepes. In fact, Puerto Rican activists on both the left and the right immediately jumped on the crisis to point to and demand a resolution of the island's status question. Of course, no one in his or her right mind believes the status issue will be resolved anytime soon. Certainly not in a few months, as the crisis was unfolding, or in the next few years, and possibly not for decades more. But to ignore how colonialism has shaped the current crisis would be a distortion of reality and damage efforts to devise any fundamental solutions. I believe a lasting solution now is closer, precisely because all sides recognize that the current condition cannot continue. For those of us searching for ways to concretely help the vast majority of those affected by the crisis, the 99% of Puerto Ricans as opposed to the 1% of the island's elite who are tied to the interests of American banks and multinationals, it's not sufficient to simply cry colonialism, to insist that nothing can be done until the status issue is resolved. We need to dig deep to analyze how U.S. domination of Puerto Rico evolved over the past 20 or 30 years. how changes in the world capitalist economy have been manifested in our own homeland. It is time we acknowledge that globalization has rendered historic concepts of national independence almost meaningless. You no longer need foreign armies to control the population when you can read everyone's mail, tap everyone's phone, empty a country's coffers, and paralyze its economy from afar through satellites, instant wire transfers, intercepts of communication junctures, and simple cancellation of bank credit lines. We need more creative and flexible tactics to defend small nations from foreign domination. New ways to assert national sovereignty in an increasingly interdependent world. Some of us began to describe Puerto Rico as America's Greece. Could the island's economic collapse and financial crisis threaten the larger American economy of which it is an integral part? Most financial experts immediately scoffed and dismissed the notion. But then most of them discounted the possibility that the subprime mortgage crisis could spark a worldwide recession. The skeptics this time included some prominent liberals, such as Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman, who raised the outlandish idea a few months after the crisis began in one of his columns in the New York Times, when Krugman, that Puerto Rico was simply a victim of geography. Writing in the Times, Krugman said, quote, Puerto Rico may, to an important extent, just suffer from being a slightly hard-to-reach island in a time when corporations place a high premium on easy, just-in-time shipments. In many ways, Puerto Rico is worse than Greece because it has even less ability to act independently than that depression-racked nation. The normal refrain you hear in most media accounts is that Puerto Rico cannot resort to the normal protections of federal Chapter 9 bankruptcy because federal law only permits cities or public corporations within states to use Chapter 9, and since the island is not an independent country, it obviously can't go to the International Monetary Fund to seek some kind of a financial bailout. The IMF is infamous for concocting. The island is in this atypical netherworld, they say. But very few go on one step further and ask, why is that? If it is neither a state nor an independent nation, what exactly is Puerto Rico? And why has such an important issue, like what happens when the government can't pay its debts, fallen through the cracks when it comes to Puerto Rico? The answer, as we all know, and as this conference is clearly aware, is colonialism. The answer is Congress can make any laws it wants when it comes to Puerto Rico. And in the case of bankruptcy, it did just that. The battle to create the Promesa Board has obviously settled this question once and for all. As all of the branches of the federal government, the Congress, the Supreme Court, and the White House, all in the process of the months leading up to the creation of the Promesa Board, all agreed for the first time that Puerto Rico has never had sovereignty, that the free associated state never existed. They all reaffirmed to the world that the U.S. still has a colonial possession. What better example could there be of that than a Promesa Board of people who mostly live in the United States making governing decisions from New York City over the lives of Puerto Rico's 3.5 million people. Now, even when you consider the DC Control Board, which was used as a model, supposedly, for the Promesa Control Board. The DC Control Board created, it was in 1995. It was under a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, and under a Republican Congress, the Newt Gingrich Congress, when DC was put into receivership. They established a control board of 5 members, all appointed by the president. So Newt Gingrich and the Republican majority gave the president the power to name all 5 members in consultation with the Congress, but the president had the full power. The Puerto Rico Control Board ended up being 7 people named by the president, but 4 of them had to be from a list supplied by Republicans. So this Republican Congress did not give President Obama anywhere near the power to decide the composition of the board that they gave, that the Republicans of 1995 gave to Bill Clinton. In addition, in the DC Control Board, the president got to name the chair. In the Puerto Rico Control Board, the majority of 4 Republicans got to name the chair. So it was a complete emasculation of the power of the president. In the DC Control Board, all 5 members had to be residents of the District of Columbia. In the Puerto Rico Control Board, the majority didn't have to be residents of Puerto Rico. So even in the creation of a control board, the level of complete impunity and audacity and arrogance of this Congress vis-a-vis citizens in trouble is clearly just in the creation of the structure. The other thing, which I think is more relevant, and I'll get into this a little later, is that Congress ended up absorbing all of the pension liabilities of the District of Columbia. I think there's something like $2 to $3 billion in pension liabilities that the District of Columbia could not pay. Congress incorporated the employees in the District of Columbia into the federal government's pension fund. So there was a clear effort, a recognition on the part of Congress that you were not only going to establish a control board, you were going to have to assume some responsibility over fixing the financial problem that the district found itself in. Here, there's perhaps more legal argument to the fact that this debt ultimately is a debt that the federal government will have to deal with, not just that Puerto Rico will have to deal with. And I'm sure that there are lots of people who don't want to have that heard in court, but it would take a long time. Anyway, the skeptics kept saying that contagion from the possible bankruptcy of Puerto Rico would not affect the rest of the American economy. I want to quote to you from one of these market analysts just a few weeks ago, talking about the situation with what's happened most recently with the Promesa Board, which is the board's decision that not only did the government of Puerto Rico did not provide a sufficient budget that would meet the debt problems, the immediate debt problems of the island, but that the creditors could not expect to get paid as much. So this is from one of these, it's called alpha.com. On March 11th, a new plan was delivered and mystifyingly approved by the board. And it is a disaster for bondholders. All it speaks to is how to increase cash flow and cut expense, which are fine, and aims to satisfy the GO bondholders, which is also good. However, all the other creditors, the rest, are left out in the cold, having to absorb a 70% crackdown. 70% crackdown. So the Promesa Board, appointed by the U.S. government, has now admitted just a few weeks ago that it is impossible to pay all this debt, and that a big section of the creditors are going to get 25 to 30 cents on the dollar for the debt that is owed to them. That had an immediate impact on the municipal bond market, and in fact, the bond insurers, AMBEC, MBIA, Assured Guarantee, within hours of this announcement, the price of their stocks started to plummet because they are insuring these bonds. And if now even the control board says there's no way to pay all this money back, all these bondholders are going to have to take a big loss. These insurers are going to have to pay. AMBEC, the last time I looked, AMBEC insured $9 billion in Puerto Rico bonds. And if the control board is saying there's no way Puerto Rico is going to be able to pay this back, that means AMBEC has to pay it. You know, AMBEC has to pay because a lot of the bonds are, not all the bonds, but a lot of the bonds are insured. So there's going to be a ripple effect